Well, welcome back, everyone. So we are moving ahead in our into our fifth chapter now of our grammar and our fifth session for Intro to Biblical Hebrew. And here again, we've got a bit of a short one, but I think it's better to carve these up into smaller bits than to take everything at once for some of these chapters. And this is one of those places where I think it's wise to do that. We're going to get at really two dots today. Two dots is all we're responsible for. One of them we've seen already, but now we're going to try and look back there into what we saw with our Begad Kefat letters, learn a bit more about them, as well as a bit more about what we're going to call a Dagesh forte, which could cause us some confusion if we don't pay attention to some rules and guidelines here. So two dots is all we've got to deal with, but these two dots kind of matter, and again, they will help us for understanding not only pronunciation, but also the translation, the proper translation of some words, as we'll see before the end of the day. So let's get into these two. So this is where we've been. This would be way back when we're looking at the alphabet. There were 6 characters that we flagged as these Begad Kefat characters, is what we're calling them. Beit, Gimel, Dalet, Kaf, Pei, and Tav. Now these are those characters that we said could have a dot placed within them, and that dot is a Dagesh Lene. And if you recall, these were characters that we said when we place that dot in them, it hardens their pronunciation value. It sharpens it up. It gives it a full stop sound. Now, while we have 6 of them, we did say that we're only going to pay attention to that pronunciation difference in 3 of them. So we cut our work in half in a way. We said the Beit, the Kaf, and the Pei would be the ones that we were paying attention to. So just kind of by way of review, without our Dagesh, we would have a sound for each of these that is not a full stop. So for our Beit, it was a V sound, victory. When we have the Dagesh placed within it, it became a hard B as in battle. So victory, battle. That's the Dagesh Lene, making it so we change that pronunciation value. Moving down the line, we have our Kaf. The same thing there. We said the difference there would be without the Dagesh, it would be something like Bach, or Loch. Whereas with the Dagesh, we have a harder sound, king, that hard K sound. And then lastly, just by way of review, our Pei would be a hard P with the Dagesh, pipe, I believe was our example. Whereas this would be our PH sound, like alpha. So pipe, alpha. And so far we saw that dot only in these characters. The one thing we can carry forward with us is that Dagesh Lene will only show up in a Begad Kefat character. Remember that a Dagesh Lene could not appear in any other character. It couldn't be in the gutturals, couldn't be in Rish, couldn't be in any other characters. So if we see a dot in another character, it's got to be something else. And this is where things get interesting. If we want to start to think about where those differences lie, again, it's going to be really helpful to try to get a sense of some guidelines, some rules that will help us make that decision. One of the rules that we said right away before we start to do some comparisons, here we have a dot in a character here. We know that it's one of our Begad Kefat characters. But technically, that could be something we'll talk about in a second. This could also be a Dagesh forte. One of the rules we said was that at the very beginning of a word, if it's a Begad Kefat character, as it is here, Devarim, an example from our last lesson, then that dot will always be a Dagesh Lene here. So that's one rule to kind of get out of the way. If it's a Begad Kefat, if it's starting a word, it will always have a Dagesh Lene, and that at least will solve that problem in that one context for us. But there are some other places we could have some confusion, so let's have a look at some examples. Alright, now we know something about our Dagesh Lene. So what about this second kind of Dagesh, this Dagesh forte? Now, A Dagesh forte is the same symbol as a Dagesh lene. It can show up in any character except gutturals and resh, so any character including our Begad Kefat characters. And it's represented by this little dot, this same dot that we've seen before, but now representing something different. Now, the function of this Dagesh, however, is not to harden the pronunciation of a sound like it was the Dagesh lene. Rather, it's to represent that a consonant has been doubled. There's actually a representation of two consonants within one. So if we take this first example here, and we'll come back to these, ata, ata, we can see that Dagesh in the middle character there, in the tav, and this is simply the pronoun you. So what is that representing? It's not representing a Dagesh lene, it's representing a Dagesh forte. We'll say why in a minute, but just to give us a clear sense of what we're looking at, we won't worry about the vowels for the time being. But that Dagesh is doing double duty here by representing these two tavs in one. Well, we only have one tav included. That little dot in the middle is saying this is actually a doubled character. And that does a few things for us in terms of pronunciation. Ata. In a way, that tav is closing one syllable and opening another. So our clear-cut rules of syllabification are getting a bit murky here, but that's the job of this Dagesh forte, to represent two characters in one. Now, in our pronunciation, we aren't going to really accentuate that. At-ta, we'll simply say at-ta, but we need to recognize that that is a Dagesh forte, and there are two consonants bound up in that one character because of its presence there. Now, that's what it looks like. That's what its function is. When that dot shows up in any other character that is not a Begad Kefat character, then automatically we know it's a Dagesh forte, because a Dagesh lene cannot appear in a character that's not a Begad Kefat character. That's kind of a backwards way of saying that really the only place we need to try to sort things out is for our Begad Kefat characters. So really, we only need to worry about those 6 characters of the entire Hebrew alphabet, because those 6 characters are the only characters that can take either a Dagesh lene or a Dagesh forte. So we need to be able to differentiate between them, but only in those cases. Thankfully, though, there's a couple of quick and ready rules or guidelines we can use, and that's what we're going to look at here in this section. So we've got 2 words for us. Ata, which means you, and malka, which is a word for queen. I think we learned the word melech already, king. Malka is queen, and we know that by this ending here. But for now, we're worried about that dot in the middle, the Dagesh on either side. So what are the rules? The first rule that we're going to rely on for these Begad Kefat characters is if that Dagesh is preceded by a vowel, it's a Dagesh forte. So in this instance here, we have a vowel coming right before it. Therefore, we can say that that Dagesh in ata is a Dagesh forte, and that it's meant to represent this sort of configuration. It's a Dagesh forte. We know that because of the vowel. So there's our first rule. Now the second rule is really just the reverse of that. So we're not learning 2 rules. It's just the opposite, stating the rule in the other direction. So if a Dagesh forte, or rather if a Dagesh, here's our Dagesh, malka, is preceded by a consonant. Here's our consonant. Of course, we have a shava, but we know that a shava is not a full vowel. It's just a short stop. If a Dagesh is preceded by a consonant, then it's a Dagesh lene. So here we can say that that is with certainty a Dagesh lene. So once again, we're kind of leaning back on what we've already talked about. Some things we've already learned, that kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And here's where things like syllables and knowing our vowels matters a lot, and now knowing something about the shiva, because we need to know that shiva is not really a vowel. It wants to be one, but it doesn't have enough to hold a full sound on its own. It's a short stop. So for our second rule here, we're almost going to ignore it. Here we're looking for, do we have a full vowel beside it, before it rather? If so, it's a Dagesh forte. And if we don't have a full vowel before it, then we're looking at this consonant to tell us that this is a Dagesh Lene. And remember, sounds like probably a lot of explanation and a lot of rules, but this only applies to these Begad Kefat characters because these are the only characters that can take either a Dagesh forte or a Dagesh Lene. If you see a dot in any other character, it's going to be that Dagesh forte. I want to look at one last dot here that we may see in one other place, and then that should be about it for the dots, for at least new ones for some time. So why don't we turn a page and try looking at the Mapik. All right, here's our last dot for the day. It probably feels like we're almost learning Morse code, all these dots and dashes in Hebrew, but this one should be the last of it for some time. Before we finish up, we're going to talk about the Mapik, and this is again a dot. Here we're talking about the dot in this final hey, not about this Dagesh, but we're talking about the dot in this final hey. Now, a Mapik will only occur with the consonant hey, as it does here, and it will only occur with that consonant hey at the end of a word. We won't have this at the beginning or in the middle of a word. It will only occur in that consonant and will only occur in that position. So hey at the end of the word. Now its job, what it's doing there, its function, is to tell you that that hey is trying to hold its consonantal value. Although when we pronounce it, we might not pronounce it as such with an H sound as much. But what it's signaling for us is that what we're looking at is a hey as a consonant, not a Kametz hey as a vowel letter. So let's look at these examples and see if we can tell the difference. Malka, up top here, that's the word that we saw a moment ago for queen, a queen. Later on in the term, we are going to get to pronouns and then suffixes, pronominal suffixes. One of our pronominal suffixes, third feminine singular, so her, something, will be this Kametz hey configuration. Here what we're getting is that Kametz hey configuration of a pronominal suffix. The only difference between this and the form above is this little dot known as a Mapik. Whereas this word was one word for queen, this is in fact two morphemes. The word melech, which means king, and the pronominal suffix her. So this second word would mean her king. The only difference between her king and queen is that little dot, that Mapik at the end. Again, it's adding to the long list of small things to remember, or at least tuck away for later. But for us, we know that a Dagesh will not show up in a guttural. A Dagesh Lene will not show up in a guttural. A Dagesh forte will not, but a Mapik will show up in a guttural, and here is the only place we will have that with a hey at the end of the word. So for today, that's really kind of the tour through a few more dots that we need to learn. The Dagesh Lene and the Dagesh forte are definitely the most important ones to be able to sort out. So remember those basic rules that we talked about. And remember that those rules only apply to Begad Kefat characters. So really we're only talking about 6 characters out of the entire Hebrew alphabet. If the list of rules is sounding like a lot and it's adding up and hard to keep straight, don't lose sight of the bigger picture. We're talking about an entire language that we're trying to develop here an understanding of, whereas those rules we're dealing with really had to do with 6 characters, so they only have to do with a few small things along the way. Now, we've been working through this kind of sights and sounds unit in our textbook, and then alongside of that in class and with these podcasts. The next few things we're going to deal with are going to be getting into some matters that have less to do, perhaps, with just pronunciation and syllables and things going on within words. We're going to start looking at things like definite articles, where we start to have things added to words and where words actually start to make sense and have some meaning and have a context. So that's where we'll be next time.